The oak door of the Ravenmore church burst open with a crisp sound, echoing among hundreds of candles and rows of benches covered in pure white lace. The priest was raising his voice, the sacred vow having just reached the edge of his lips. "Adrian Ashford, do you take this woman to be your wife, to love and to cherish her until—" His voice was cut off by a silhouette running up the aisle between the church. A maid, frayed brown clothes, bare feet without shoes, disheveled red hair, and a long scar running from her temple down to her chin on the left side. She walked with a limp, leaving a thin trail of blood on the crimson carpet that people had spread out for the new bride of Ravenmore. "Do not say the vow, Your Grace." The girl's voice broke in the middle of the sacred space like a knife/tearing silk fabric. "The woman you are about to marry is the very one who murdered Duchess Eleanor." The entire church fell dead silent for a long second. Then whispers rose like waves. A lady sitting in the front row dropped the fan in her hand. A marquis fell back into his seat. On the altar, the bride Vivian Croft looked exquisitely beautiful in a white silk dress embroidered with pearls. The bouquet of roses in her hand trembled, then fell to the granite floor. A flower stem snapped in two. Duke Adrian Ashford did not move. He stood there, tall and slender in a black ceremonial suit, his cold gray eyes slowly turning from his fiancée toward the scarred maid. And in that moment, just a single moment, made him feel something tightening in his chest. This girl's eyes, he had seen those eyes somewhere before, not in Ravenmore, but in a place further away, colder, 3 years ago, a night that he had tried to forget for 1,000 days. "Arrest her," Vivian screamed, her voice bursting into tears. "She is crazy. She is intentionally ruining my wedding." 2 guards stepped forward. The maid did not run. She just stood there, blood flowing down to her ankle, and looked straight at the Duke. To understand why a poor maid dared to ruin the wedding of the most powerful duke in the northern region of the kingdom. Why she knew a secret that no one else, not even the Duke himself, suspected for 3 whole years. We must turn back time 6 weeks ago to a morning at the end of October, when she first set foot at the side gate of Ravenmore Castle, with a name that was not her real name. Chapter 1. The Scarred Maid and the Morning Castle. A thick fog covered the open fields of the Ravenmore region on that late October morning. The girl standing in front of the castle's side gate was a slender silhouette in a faded gray wool cloak, her hands red from the cold, clutching a neatly folded letter of introduction. She had walked for 3 days from the southern port town, sleeping in abandoned chapels, eating dry bread and drinking spring water. When the gatekeeper finally opened the rusty iron door, she politely bowed her head and said her name. "Lyra Marsh, sir. I am here to apply for a job." That name was not her real name, but she had practiced saying it hundreds of times on the way, to the point that her lips no longer trembled when uttering it. The housekeeper of Ravenmore, a straight-backed gray-haired woman named Holloway, received her in the large kitchen. She looked her up and down with the eyes of a person who had worked for the nobility long enough to no longer be surprised by anything. "Do you know how to read?" "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Holloway raised her eyebrows. That was not an answer a girl applying for a dishwashing job usually gave. "Then hide it. Around here, a literate maid will make others uncomfortable." She glanced down at the letter of introduction, then set it aside without bothering to read it carefully. "I accept you, but not because your papers are good, but because we are severely short-handed." "Do you know why?" Lyra shook her head, although she knew full well, because this castle— Mrs. Holloway lowered her voice— "is haunted." Lyra swallowed. "Haunted, ma'am. Lady Eleanor, the old housekeeper, faintly crossed herself, our late Duchess. She drowned under the ice lake 3 years ago, on the exact night of a full moon in January. People said it was an accident. She went for a walk. The ice layer was too thin, but since that day, not a single servant has dared to walk past the east corridor after midnight. Half of the old servants have resigned, because people hear crying, the sound of someone calling the Duke's name." Lyra kept a calm face, but inside her chest, her heart was beating to the point that she feared Mrs. Holloway would hear it. "Are you afraid of ghosts, Miss Marsh?" "No, ma'am," she answered. Slowly and clearly, "I think the living are more terrifying than the dead." Mrs. Holloway looked at her a bit longer after that sentence, then stood up and handed her a coarse apron. "You work in the laundry area. Do not go up to the 2nd floor unless called. Do not step into the east wing. Do not look straight into the Duke's eyes if he walks past. And for God's sake, absolutely, never mention Lady Eleanor's name in front of him." "Understood, yes, ma'am." That afternoon, Lyra saw Duke Adrian Ashford for the first time. She was bending over, carrying a basket of wet tablecloths, past the ground-floor gray stone corridor when the sound of leather shoes echoed. She stepped back close to the wall, bowing her head low as instructed. But from the corner of her eye she still saw him pass. A tall, slender physique, his black hair showing early silver at the temples even though he was only 35. A charcoal gray suit, gloved hands. On his face there was no expression, but there was something else. A shadow. Something heavy that Lyra recognized instantly, because she had carried that very shadow in her chest for the past 3 years. He passed by without looking at her. She almost breathed a sigh of relief. But then, right when about to disappear behind the corner of the corridor, he stopped. "You are the new person." His voice was deep, dry, without a bit of warmth. Lyra bowed lower. "Yes. Your Grace, name, Lyra Marsh, Your Grace." There was a strange moment of silence, as if he were waiting for her to say something more, or listening for something in that name. Lyra did not dare look up. In the end, he only said, "Stay away from the East Wing." Then the sound of leather shoes echoed, fading away. That night, after the entire castle had fallen asleep, Lyra left the small room in the attic meant for maids. She walked barefoot to avoid making sound, carrying a candle that was shielded by the palm of her hand. She did not go toward the East Wing. Not yet. She went to the drawing room on the first floor, which Mrs. Halloway had mentioned briefly in the afternoon, that no one dared enter to clean anymore. The door creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, dust covered the piano, the red velvet upholstered chairs, the harp that had a broken string. And on the wall further away, beneath a tightly covered silk cloth, was the portrait that she had walked for 3 years to look back at once again. Lyra set the candle down. She reached out her trembling hand, pulling the cloth down. Lady Eleanor Ashford looked at her from inside the picture frame. Her golden brown hair fell loose. Her kind blue eyes were like lake water on a sunny day. A small smile at the corner of her lips, the smile that only those who were once loved by her got to see. Lyra knelt down in front of the painting. Her tears fell to the wooden floor that had not been cleaned for 3 winters. "I have returned, milady," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I promised you that night. Beneath the ice layer, I promised if I survived, I would find out the person who pushed you down. And I have found out. She is on her way here. 2 weeks from now she will set foot into Ravenmoor. And this time she wants to steal the Duke as well." Lyra placed a hand on the picture frame, right beneath the dead blue eyes. "I am not a maid, milady. You know I am not, but I will play that role long enough to keep my promise to you. No matter what price has to be paid." Behind her at the doorway, the sound of a leather shoe faintly echoed, then stopped in the darkness. Lyra did not hear it. She was crying too loudly to be able to hear, but someone had stood there, and that person had heard each and every word she said. Chapter 2. The perfect fiancé and the unusual details. Lyra never knew who had stood at the doorway of the drawing room that night. When she finally raised her head from Eleanor's portrait, wiping her tears with the corner of her apron and turning around. The door was closed. Only a very faint scent lingered in the cold air, not perfume, not laundry soap, but something like cigar smoke that she could not name. She stood there for a very long time, one hand still placed on the picture frame, listening to her heart beating in her chest. If it was Mrs. Halloway, she would be fired tomorrow morning. If it was some servant, the rumor would spread within a week. If it was the Duke, she did not dare think about the third possibility. But the next morning, no one said anything. Mrs. Halloway ordered her to bring hot water up to the 2nd floor as usual. The cook grumbled because she spilled a bowl of milk. The Duke passed by the corridor once during the day and did not look at her. Everything was still normal, too normal, to the extent that Lyra began to doubt her own ears. Perhaps that sound of shoes was just the sound of the wind blowing through a broken window. Perhaps she had been too tense. 2 weeks passed like that. Lyra did laundry, cleaned, and learned every hidden corner of Ravenmoor Castle. Passageways that she had never stepped into 3 years ago, when she was still a servant of Lady Eleanor, at the city mansion. This castle was larger, colder, and had more secrets. She counted each door, each staircase, each hidden corner where a murderer could hide. By the 15th day, the carriage train of Lady Vivian Croft had arrived. Lyra was washing tablecloths in the backyard when the sound of horse hooves and wooden wheels echoed at the main gate. Mrs. Halloway ran past in a hurry, shouting at her to put the basket of cloths down and go line up with the other servants in the great hall. Lyra wiped her hands on her apron, trying to keep a calm face, even though her heart was beating to the point that she thought everyone could hear it. When Lady Vivian stepped down from the black carriage painted in gold, the entire line of servants faintly sighed. She was beautiful, beautiful in the way that even Lyra, who had hated her from before meeting, had to secretly admit. Her hair was black as pure coal gathered neatly beneath a purple velvet hat. Her skin was white to the point of being transparent. Her eyes were large brown, watery, and gentle. When she smiled at Mrs. Halloway and said, "I heard that you have taken care of this castle since before I was born. I look forward to learning a lot from you." Her voice was like honey poured into a glass, sweet, thin, and without a bit of ripple. Mrs. Halloway, whom Lyra had never seen smile in the past 2 weeks, was bowing her head and blushing like a young girl. Duke Adrian stepped out last. He kissed the back of Vivienne's hand with the proper politeness of a nobleman, no more and no less. Lyra observed very carefully. There was no exchange of looks, not a single private smile. He treated her like treating a document that needed to be signed. Necessary, according to proper procedures, with no interest. "I have traveled a long distance," Vivienne said, her voice full of worry. "I hope you did not have too much trouble because of the preparations." "The council arranged everything," Adrian replied dryly. "You will find everything in order." Lyra recognized it immediately. That this marriage was not love. Mrs. Halloway whispered that night in the kitchen when Vivienne had gone up to her room to rest, that the Council of Northern Nobility had forced the Duke to remarry for a year now, because he did not have an heir yet. Vivienne was chosen because the Croft family possessed distant royal blood. It was a cold arrangement between wax seals and contracts. Vivienne knew it, Adrian knew it, and Lyra knew that that was exactly the reason Vivienne had chosen the Ashford house. A wealthy widower who did not love her was the perfect prey. The first dinner took place in the large dining room. Lyra was assigned to stand next to the wine cabinet along with 2 other maids, ready to pour water or change napkins. She stood still as a statue, eyes downcast, but her ears caught every sound in the room. That was when she saw the brooch. Vivienne wore a black velvet dress, the collar high embroidered with gold thread. On the chest of the dress, pinned diagonally on the left, was a large emerald brooch surrounded by 12 small diamonds. The shape of a lily flower. Lyra almost dropped the water pitcher in her hand. She knew that brooch. She had personally pinned it onto the dress of the late Lady Eleanor during the funeral 3 years ago. It was an heirloom of the Ashford family, given to Eleanor on her wedding day. Eleanor loved it. She wore it on every important occasion. When the coffin was closed for the last time, the brooch was still on her chest. Lyra had cried when pinning it on, yet now it was lying on Vivienne Croft's chest. Lyra's head spun. She forced herself to set the water pitcher down on the side table, trying to keep her hand from shaking. There were 3 possibilities. 1, this was a replica, but no. Her eyes, trained through many years of serving Lady Eleanor, made her know for certain that she could not be mistaken. The small engraving on the edge of the emerald, where the jeweler had signed his name in 1832, was still there. 2, someone had dug up the grave and taken it back. 3, the brooch was never buried together, meaning the person who prepared the funeral, the person who was present at Ravenmoor that night, had swapped it before the coffin closed. Mrs. Halloway giggled from the end of the room as Vivienne told a humorous story about the trip from the capital. Lyra raised her head to look at Vivienne again, and this time she saw the second thing. "I must tell you the truth," Vivienne was saying to Adrian. "This castle has something very familiar to me. I have been here before in a dream, can you believe it? Last night I went to find the dressing room. The maids didn't have time to leave me yet. I turned left at the grand corridor, walked past the portrait room, and opened the 3rd door on the right. There is a small passageway behind the bookshelf, leading up to the drawing room. I went in there to rest for a moment. Isn't that so strange?" Adrian stopped his knife on the meat plate. He did not look up immediately. He only said very softly, "That is a private passageway. It is not in the architectural drawings of the castle." "Oh, is that so?" Vivienne smiled gently. "I am so lucky to have found the right one." Lyra felt a chill down her spine. That passageway was only known by 2 people, Adrian and Eleanor. No mason, no housekeeper, no servant was allowed to enter. Eleanor had once told Lyra that it was the place where she hid when she wanted to be left alone to read books. How could a person who had never set foot into Ravenmoor dream of that passageway? As Vivienne leaned over for Adrian to pour more wine for her, a thin wave of scent drifted over to where Lyra stood. She inhaled, and her legs almost collapsed. Damascus jasmine, mixed with a bit of sandalwood and honey. That was the perfume that Eleanor had specially ordered from a creator in Paris. The creator had died in 1834. That formula had been lost along with him. Eleanor was the last person in this world who still possessed it. Lyra looked up, her eyes met Vivienne's eyes, and Vivienne smiled at her, a small, discreet smile, which no one else in the room noticed. A smile that said, "I know you saw, and you can do nothing about it." That night, Lyra tried to approach Adrian. She waited until he went up to the study to work alone, holding a bundle of clean towels, taking the excuse to bring them up to change. She had just set foot on the final step of the staircase leading to the study when a smooth voice stopped her. "Where are you going, girl?" Vivienne stood at the top of the stairs, still in the black velvet dress, but now draped with an additional white silk scarf. Her hand held a small oil lamp. The lamp illuminated her face from below, and for the first time, it was not beautiful but sharp. "I am bringing towels up for the Duke, Lady Vivienne." "Give them to me. I will bring them to him." Lyra hesitated for a second too long. Vivienne stepped down one step. She reached her hand out. "Hand them over." Lyra handed over the bundle of towels. When their hands touched, Vivienne's fingers were cold as ice. Vivienne received the bundle of towels, then did not leave. She raised this lamp higher, shining it straight into Lyra's face. "Your scar is very interesting," Vivienne said softly. "Looks like from a thin blade, or a short sword. Do you remember who left it for you?" Lyra tried to keep her voice calm. "A horse, Lady Vivienne. I fell into the stable when I was a child. A horse," Vivienne repeated, without changing her voice. "What a strange horse, the cut is too clean." She tilted her head, admiring Lyra like a jeweler admiring a precious stone of unknown origin. "I feel I have met you somewhere before. Are you sure you have never worked in the Croft family estate? Or at some mansion in the south? Your face. It is so familiar. I just came up from the countryside. Lady Vivienne, I have never served in a noble house." Vivienne looked at her for another long second, then smiled radiantly. The smile she used for Mrs. Halloway, for Adrian, for the whole world. "Then welcome to Ravenmore. Lyra Marsh, I hope you will stay with us for a very long time." She turned around to leave, bringing the bundle of towels up to the study. Lyra stood still on the stairs, one hand gripping the railing to avoid collapsing. Vivienne had recognized her. She did not remember the exact name, did not remember the exact face, but she had smelled the scent of 3 years ago on Lyra. Just like the way Lyra had smelled the scent of the Damascus perfume on her. The game had begun, and now both of them already knew Chapter 3. The Ice Lake Night, the truth is revealed. There was a story that Lyra had never told anyone. 7 years ago, when she was only 13 years old, she lived in a slum on the east side of Halverton City. A place that even the night watchman did not dare enter after the sunset. Her mother had died of typhus since the year she turned 9. Her father was a drunken blacksmith, who gradually sold off the furniture in the house for alcohol, then later gradually sold off his own daughter as well. Not to a brothel, he said that so as to look like a decent father. But sold her to the laundries, the kitchens, the textile mills where 13-year-old children worked 16 hours a day, and sometimes did not return. In the winter of the year Lyra was 13, a black carriage engraved with the crest of the Ashford house stopped in front of the door of the laundry where she was working. A young woman stepped down, wearing a blue velvet cloak, her golden brown hair falling loose beneath her hood. That beautiful woman was going around distributing blankets to the slum on the occasion of Christmas. She saw Lyra bending over washing a large linen cloth in water so hot that her hands were red and blistered. She asked Lyra's age. The girl lied, saying 16. Eleanor. At that time Lyra still did not know it was Eleanor. She just looked at Lyra and said, "You are not 16, you lie very poorly that day." Eleanor paid 10 gold coins to the workshop owner to buy out Lyra completely. She brought Lyra back to the Ashford City mansion. She did not turn Lyra into an adopted sister. That was something society did not allow. But she gave Lyra a small room in the maid quarters, taught Lyra to read, to write, taught Lyra how to hold a teacup without making the porcelain clatter against the saucer. She told Lyra, "I don't want you to become a noble. I want you to become a person who can stand on your own 2 feet. Noble or not, that is a matter of fate, standing firm. That is your business." Lyra loved Eleanor in the way that an orphan child loves the first person who does not beat them. Meaning absolutely, from the very bottom of her heart, without a single shred of doubt. In the 2 years after that, Lyra became Eleanor's most trusted maid. Lyra brushed Eleanor's hair, read letters with her, learned how to brew tea according to the formula Eleanor liked. Lyra was the only person Eleanor allowed into her private room without needing to knock. Adrian at that time was still a young duke who still loved his wife quietly and deeply. He had once joked that if one day Eleanor disappeared, he would ask Lyra even before notifying the police. In the autumn of the year Lyra was 16, Eleanor began to change. She became more contemplative. She read a lot of papers at night. Those were legal documents, old genealogy registers. One night Lyra brought hot milk up to her room and caught her crying in front of a bundle of old letters. "I have a cousin," Eleanor said softly when Lyra asked. "A cousin whom the Ashford clan hid away. Her mother was the sister of my father-in-law, but she fell in love with a man who did not possess noble blood. And the family disowned her. She gave birth to the girl in a workhouse, then died. The girl was raised in an orphanage. Not a single person in the Ashford lineage acknowledged her. Tristan, meaning Adrian, does not know. His father hid everything before passing away." "What are you planning to do, milady?" Lyra asked. "I am planning to find the girl, give her back her family name. Give her back a portion of the estate. It is the right thing to do." And Eleanor searched. For 6 months she hired private detectives, wrote dozens of letters to orphanages, convents. Lyra helped her copy documents. That cousin girl had the name Margaret. Margaret had left the orphanage at the age of 14 and disappeared from all registers. In the cold January, Eleanor received a letter. The letter was unsigned, written in elegant female handwriting. The letter wrote, "I am the person whom Milady is looking for. I will meet Milady tonight at 11 o'clock, at the ice lake behind Ravenmore Castle. Please come alone, Milady. I am very afraid." Eleanor did not come alone. She brought Lyra along, but instructed her to stand far away, hiding behind the oak trees. That night was so cold that breath froze on eyelashes. The lake surface was covered with a thin ice layer, the moonlight reflecting white as bone. Eleanor walked out to the middle of the lake shore, her oil lamp flickering in the wind. Lyra hid behind the oak trunk, shivering in her thin cloak. A silhouette appeared from the other side of the lake. A young woman in a black cloak, her hood pulled low. She walked slowly toward Eleanor. "Margaret," Eleanor called softly. "Is that you?" The girl did not answer. She kept walking out onto the middle of the ice layer. Eleanor stepped toward her, smiling, her arms outspread as if preparing to embrace the cousin lost for so many years. The girl pulled out something small from inside her cloak. Lyra did not see clearly, but something flashed beneath the moonlight. After that the girl said a sentence, only one sentence. Lyra was too far away to hear clearly, but she saw Eleanor freeze. Eleanor's face turned stark white. She took a step back, the ice layer beneath her feet creaked. "No," Lyra heard Eleanor say. "Not you, you couldn't possibly." The girl pushed hard. Lyra did not remember clearly whether she had screamed or not. She only remembered herself running. The ice layer broke with a sound like a breaking bone. Eleanor fell into the black water. Lyra rushed to the edge of the lake, her hand reaching out after her lady. The girl in black turned back to look at her. In that moment, just a single moment, beneath the January moonlight, Lyra saw the girl's face, young, beautiful, large brown eyes, a small smile at the corner of her lips. The girl drew a blade and stepped toward Lyra. Lyra tried to run, but the snow was too thick. The blade slashed a line from her temple down to her chin. Hot blood poured down her neck. She fell face down into the snow. She heard the footsteps of the girl in black stop beside her. Then she heard a sentence that she would remember for the rest of her life. "Leave her to bleed to death. No one will believe a little beggar girl from the slum." Footsteps walked away. Lyra did not die. A charcoal burner going out to gather firewood early found her at dawn and brought her back to his hut. His wife stitched up the wound on her face with coat-sewing thread. Lyra was delirious in fever for 10 days. When she woke up, people had buried Lady Eleanor a week prior. The whole kingdom believed that it was an accident. The Duchess went for a night walk. The ice layer was too thin, a sad story of winter. Lyra did not return to Ravenmore. She did not return to the Ashford mansion. She knew if she appeared, the person who slashed her would find another way to finish the job. She hid herself in small towns, working under false names, learning every trade that could be learned: sewing, laundry, cooking, reading maps, writing fake letters. She saved every coin to hire private detectives. She went to look for Margaret. She went to look for the girl who had murdered her second mother. It took 3 years. She found Margaret's trace at a southern port town, where a young orphan girl had arrived in February, 1 month after Eleanor's death. With a large amount of money of unknown origin, that girl had hired a bankrupt noble family, the Croft family, to adopt her so as to have a legitimate title. She changed her name to Vivienne. She learned to speak French, learned how to smile like a lady, and she began to appear in the balls of the capital 2 years later, with a long-term plan that only she alone knew. That plan had one final goal: to return to Ravenmore. Marry Adrian Ashford, become the legitimate Duchess of the very clan that disowned her. And after that, when the inheritance papers were signed, when a child bearing Ashford blood was born, or when certain that the estate had been transferred, she would kill Adrian and wipe the Ashford house off this world. Lyra sat in her small room in the attic of Ravenmoor Castle that night. After the encounter with Vivian on the stairs, her hands shook uncontrollably. She took out from beneath a loose floorboard a bundle of papers that she had secretly brought into Ravenmoor hidden in her bodice. Those were 3 detective reports, 2 letters from an old nun at the orphanage who had once known Margaret, and a document that she had risked her life to obtain. A copy of Margaret Ashford's birth certificate, with the confirming signature of Adrian's father. That was all the evidence she had, enough to prove Vivian was Margaret, but not enough to prove Margaret had killed Eleanor. To be able to do that, she needed something else. She needed the thing that Eleanor had clutched along down into the black water 3 years ago, the thing that Eleanor had written the name on, the appointment letter at the ice lake. And that letter, Lyra thought with a cold fire in her chest, if Vivian was a careful person. And clearly she was a careful person, then she would not destroy it. She would keep it as a trophy, and right now that trophy was somewhere in the drawers of Lady Vivian Croft's room, under the very same roof with Lyra Marsh. She folded the bundle of papers back, stuffing them down beneath the floorboard. She blew out the candle, lay down on the narrow bed, and opened her eyes looking up at the ceiling. There were 18 days left until the wedding ceremony. She had 18 days to get into that room, or Vivian would have 18 days to kill her first. Chapter 4. The silent chase. Vivian did not wait until the next morning to counterattack. When Lyra went down to the kitchen at 4 o'clock in the morning to begin her usual routine, Mrs. Halloway was already waiting at the foot of the stairs with 2 guards standing beside her. The old woman's face was deathly pale. In her hand she held a gold hairpin studded with green stones. A hairpin that Lyra had never seen in her life. This girl, Mrs. Halloway said, her voice shaking. Lady Vivian has just reported a missing hairpin worth 300 gold coins. We searched the maids' rooms and found it under your mattress. I did not take it, Lyra said, keeping her voice flat. She knew this moment would come. She just did not expect it to come this quickly. Come with us. They took her into the small study on the east side of the first floor. Mrs. Halloway stood in a corner. 2 guards stood at the door. Vivian sat on a red velvet armchair, her eyes welling with tears, a silk handkerchief clutched tightly in her hand, as if she had just cried all night because of the loss. I did not want to believe it, Vivian said softly to Adrian, who had just stepped into the room in a light-colored suit. I tried to think there was a mistake, but you see, the hairpin in her room. I only hope you handle this quickly. Don't let this matter affect our wedding ceremony. Adrian did not sit down. He walked slowly to the window, standing and looking out at the snow. His back was turned to Lyra. Do you have anything to say, Miss Marsh? Lyra stood in the middle of the room, both hands hanging down. She had a lot of things to say. She could say that the hairpin was placed under her mattress by Vivian's own hand. She could say that the woman crying into that silk handkerchief was the very one who murdered Lady Eleanor 3 years ago. She could bring out the bundle of papers hidden under the floorboard. But she knew a bitter truth. If she said everything right now, without the final evidence, she would be thrown into an insane asylum before the sun set. Vivian had prepared everything too well. Therefore Lyra chose a different path. She raised her head, looking straight at the Duke's back. Your Grace, I beg permission to ask a single question before you handle me. Ask, do you still remember Lady Eleanor's voice when she laughed? In the room the air instantly froze. Vivian stopped crying. Mrs. Halloway drew a sharp breath. The 2 guards at the door looked at each other in confusion. As for Adrian, he still stood still at the window, one hand placed on the stone sill, his knuckles stark white. He did not turn around. What did you just say? His voice was very small. I remember Lady Eleanor's laugh, Lyra said, each word slow as if placing each stone down onto the ice lake surface. She would laugh softly first, then let it out. She always covered her mouth with her left hand because of being embarrassed about her snaggletooth. She did not like bananas but loved pears. She named her white horse Moon because it was born on a full moon night in March. She read Byron's poetry every Thursday evening, and there is a promise that was not yet fulfilled to a 16-year-old girl. Adrian turned around. For the first time in 28 days Lyra had been at Ravenmoor. He looked straight into her face. Those gray eyes were not cold anymore. They were burning. Who are you? I am the person. Eleanor promised to answer the question that she did not have time to ask you. Your Grace. Vivian stood up abruptly. Duke, she is crazy. She has read news somewhere about the late lady. She is. Silence. Adrian did not raise his voice. He only said a single word, but Vivian sat down on the chair immediately. He stepped toward Lyra, coming very close. Lyra had forgotten how tall he was. She forced herself to stand still. I cannot set you free now, he said softly, enough for only her to hear. If I set you free, you will die before sunset. Do you understand? I understand. You will be confined in the South Storehouse. One night I need time, Your Grace. One night, Miss Marsh. Don't do anything foolish. Adrian turned away and said loudly, for the whole room to hear. Confine her to the South Storehouse. I will decide the punishment after the wedding ceremony. Mrs. Halloway breathed a sigh of relief. Vivian used her handkerchief to dab the corner of her eyes with a small, triumphant smile. The two guards stepped forward to lock Lyra's hands. But that night, Adrian did not leave her in the South Storehouse. Around midnight, when the entire castle had fallen into sleep before the grand day, there was the sound of a key turning softly in the lock. The storehouse door nudged open. A tall, slender silhouette stepped in, bringing along a small oil lamp and a wool shawl. Wrap this around yourself, Adrian said dryly. Lyra wrapped the shawl around her shoulders. He placed the lamp down on a wooden crate, did not sit down, did not step close. He stood leaning against the wall opposite her, his arms crossed, his gray eyes looking into the empty space between the two of them. The night you came to Ravenmoor, the night you entered the drawing room and cried in front of the painting, he said. I was standing at the doorway. Lyra gripped the shawl tightly. I heard every word you said. I intended the next day to summon you up and force you to make a statement. But I decided not to. Why? Adrian looked up. His eyes had something that Lyra had never seen in a noble. It was not pity, it was not tenderness, but a long pain that had become a part of the person he was. Because Eleanor told me about you. Lyra stopped breathing when she heard Adrian say that sentence. She called you my little sister. She told me that if there came a day she was no longer here, I must find you and protect you. Eleanor worried you wouldn't know how to take care of yourself. I thought you died along with her on the ice lake night. People found blood on the snow and a torn cloak. I paid the charcoal burner to bury a skeleton that was believed to be yours the following spring. I did not die, Your Grace, I know. He breathed a long sigh. I have known since the first night you came here and Halloway read your name. Lyra, not a common name. Eleanor said your name many times. Then why didn't you say anything? Adrian looked at her for an unusually long time. Because I have doubted my wife's death for the past 3 years. Miss Marsh, I have no evidence. I only have a cold feeling at the bottom of my chest every time I think about that night. When you arrived and began to look at Vivienne the way you look, I realized you came here for a reason. And I decided to let you find for me the thing that my 3 years of investigation could not find. He placed something down on the wooden crate beside the lamp. A white silk handkerchief embroidered with the letter E in gold thread. A handkerchief of Eleanor's. Vivienne's room is in the west wing, 2nd floor, the 3rd room on the left. She sleeps soundly until dawn because of taking sedatives. Mrs. Halloway keeps the keys to all the rooms in a wooden box on the kitchen fireplace mantel. I will say nothing more, Your Grace, Lyra. He called her real name for the first time. His voice was very soft. If you do not find anything tonight, I will have to marry her. Don't let me marry the one who killed Eleanor. He turned away and walked out of the storehouse. The door closed but was not locked. Lyra bent down to pick up the handkerchief, embroidered with the letter E. She brought it to her lips for a second. Then she stood up. Mrs. Halloway snored evenly in the small room next to the kitchen. The wooden box on the fireplace mantel opened with a soft creaking sound. Lyra took the keyring, going up the auxiliary stairs barefoot. Each of her footsteps echoed in her ears like a drumbeat. The 3rd room on the left of the west wing, 2nd floor. The door opened as smoothly as if greased. Inside, Vivienne slept on the large bed covered with pink silk curtains, her breath steady, her black hair splayed on the pillow. Lyra moved like a ghost. She knew where to look. A clever assassin does not hide trophies in a vanity drawer. She went straight to the writing desk, looking for the secret compartment behind it. All ladies' writing desks have such a compartment. She found it after the 4th press, a small compartment the size of a palm. Inside was an old yellowed letter, the edges of the paper frayed. Eleanor's handwriting, Dearest Margaret, I have found you. I will meet you tonight at 11 o'clock, at the ice lake behind Ravenmoor. Come alone, do not fear, I have a gift for you. That was precisely the appointment letter at the ice lake. Eleanor had given it to Margaret that night. Margaret had kept it for 3 years like a trophy. Lyra continued to search. In the powder box beneath the layer of pink powder was a small glass vial containing a clear, odorless liquid. She knew that kind of substance, refined liquid belladonna, colorless when mixed into hot wine. 1 drop makes the heart race, 3 drops make the heart stop. Enough for a wedding night where no one survives until morning. In the bottom drawer was a bundle of letters exchanged with a doctor named Whitmore in the capital, who would sign a death certificate of stroke due to a weak heart for the price of 500 gold coins. And on the small table beside the fireplace, placed in a silver tray. On the tray was Eleanor's emerald hairpin, dismantled, the stones being rearranged to be attached to a different design. A rose instead of a lily, so that no one would recognize it anymore. Lyra placed everything inside her apron. She was walking to the door when a voice rang out, "What are you looking for, my dearest?" Vivienne sat up in bed. She was not dreaming. Her eyes were alert and bright like a night owl's eyes. In her hand was a small pistol the size of a peach. "You are truly foolish," Vivienne said gently, then sat up, getting out of bed. "Did you think I would take sedatives the night before my own wedding ceremony?" "I heard the door when you opened it." Lyra did not answer. She lunged toward the door. Vivienne pulled the trigger. The gunshot blasted in the night room. It grazed Lyra's calf, creating a burning hot wound. Blood spurting out. Lyra fell to the floor but still rolled out the door, managing to stand up on one leg. "Catch her." Vivienne screamed loudly. "Where is everyone?" Thief Lyra ran. The hallway was long as if infinite. She heard the sound of Vivienne's feet, chasing after, heard the sound of other doors opening. She did not run toward the storehouse. She ran toward the east wing, the forbidden east wing, where no servant dared step into. She dashed into the drawing room. She dashed to Eleanor's portrait, slipping her hand behind the picture frame, where she had hidden the bundle of investigation papers from the previous evening. Just in case there came a day her attic room would be ransacked. The footsteps drew near. Lyra clutched the bundle of papers and the poison vial, crawling into the secret passage behind the bookcase. The passage that Vivienne had bragged about knowing. She crawled through the darkness, blood dripping on the wooden floor. The passage led down to the basement. The basement led out to the east garden, behind the castle. She did not have much time. She pushed open the small, dusty door and dashed outside into the blanketing white night snow. Behind her, inside the castle, the alarm bells began to ring. Chapter 5. The Wedding and the Return of Justice. The wedding dawn arrived, cold, bright, and cruel. People found Lyra at 4 o'clock in the morning, lying collapsed beneath a pine tree in the east garden. Blood had frozen on her calf and her lips were purple from the cold. She had managed to run about half a mile before her strength abandoned her. In her hand she still clutched tightly the bundle of papers and the poison vial, wrapped in the blood-stained apron. But the people who found her were not Adrian's guards. They were 2 large men whom Lyra had never seen in the castle before. The ones Vivienne had hired from the city and secretly brought in during the wedding preparation week. They dragged her up, snatched the bundle of papers from her hand, threw them into the fireplace of the north storehouse, and locked her inside with a brief order from Vivienne. "Leave her until the wedding ceremony is finished. Deal with her after that." The fireplace was burning. The bundle of papers, Lyra's most precious evidence consisting of detective reports, Margaret Ashford's birth certificate, and letters from the orphanage became ash within a few short minutes. Lyra sat on the cold floor, her back against a flour barrel, and for the first time in 3 years she let herself truly cry. Not out of fear, not out of pain, but because she had failed Eleanor. Today Adrian would marry Margaret. Tonight Adrian would drink wine with Belladonna. And by dawn tomorrow, no one in the Ashford house would be alive to know the truth. That was when she heard a very faint knock on the small window pane. A child's eyes looked in. Tom, the 11-year-old errand boy of the kitchen, whom Lyra had shared bread with during snowy nights for the past month when he was beaten and starved by the cook. He held up a key. "Got it, sister," Tom whispered. "I got it from Mrs. Halloway's belt while she was taking a nap." The key turned in the lock. As the door opened, the bells of the Ravenmore church began to ring. Each toll echoed across the snowy fields. The wedding ceremony had begun. Lyra did not have time to bandage the wound. She did not have time to change her clothes. She had no papers, no witnesses, nothing left but a glass vial containing belladonna that she had hidden in her bodice before being caught. And only one other single thing that Vivienne's men had not found. The Ice Lake appointment letter, still tucked between the lining layers of her chemise, close to her skin warm with body heat. Lyra ran barefoot through the east garden. The snow scraped against her feet. The wound on her calf opened once again, painting a crimson streak on the pure white snow background, long as a blood-soaked thread. She did not feel pain, she just ran. The Ravenmore church stood on the eastern hilltop, half a mile from the castle. When Lyra pushed the oak door wide open, the priest had raised his voice to the exact line she feared most. "Adrian Ashford, do you take this woman to be your wife? to love and to cherish her until— Do not say the vow, Your Grace. Lyra's voice broke in the middle of the sacred space like a knife/tearing silk fabric. The entire church fell dead silent for a second. Then everyone turned around together. The woman you are about to marry is the very one who murdered the late Duchess Eleanor. A lady fainted upon hearing those words. A marquise stood up abruptly. Vivian dropped the bouquet, her face stark white for a moment. Then she regained control so quickly that Lyra had to admire it. She clutched Adrian's arm, bursting into tears. Arrest her, Vivian screamed. She is the thief I reported last night. She is crazy with shame. She is taking revenge on me. 2 guards at the door stepped forward. Stop, Adrian did not raise his voice, but the entire church stopped. He stepped down from the altar, walked past the rows of nobility, walked past the priest who was holding the scripture book with trembling hands, walked to the front of Lyra. He bent down, a duke bending down before a barefoot, scarred maid standing in the middle of the church. And he placed a very gentle hand on her cheek, over the top of the long scar. Eleanor told me about you, he said softly, enough for the entire church to hear. She called you little sister. Eleanor loved you. And you came here today to keep a promise to her, didn't you? Lyra nodded. She could not speak anymore. Adrian stood up straight. He turned back to look at Vivian. Vivian was still crying, but her tears began to stop. She realized something had changed in the room. I want her to present evidence, Vivian said, her voice still shaking but still maintaining neatness, before the entire church. Otherwise, I demand she be tried for slandering the future Duchess of Ravenmore. Here is the evidence. Lyra opened her bodice and pulled out the yellowed letter. She placed it into Adrian's hand. She took out the small glass vial and placed it into his other palm. Adrian read the letter, read very slowly. When he finished reading, he handed it to the old priest. The priest read it, then handed it to the nearest marquis, who was also a supreme judge of the kingdom. The letter passed through the front rows in the silence of a breath-holding church. That is a fake letter, Vivian cried out. She forged it. This is my wife's handwriting. Adrian said, I lived with it for 10 years. I recognize every stroke. He held the glass vial up to the candlelight, and I proposed Dr. Whitmore, whom I hear is present at the wedding today as a guest of Lady Croft. Step forward and identify the substance. Do you want to, Doctor? In a row toward the back, a short, fat man in a black suit stood up abruptly and ran toward the back door. 2 guards arrested him immediately. Vivian looked around the church. She looked at Adrian. She looked at Lyra. She looked at the judge who was reading the Ice Lake appointment letter with a face as stiff as stone. And something inside her broke. She stopped crying. She began to laugh. A small laugh at first, then growing louder, then bursting into a dry, bitter laugh, with no trace left of the gentle Lady Vivian Croft. That was the laugh of Margaret, the orphan girl who had been abandoned by the Ashford clan in the orphanage since birth. She had grown up in hunger, cold, and neglect, only to spend 10 years of her life learning to become an instrument of revenge. Do you know, Margaret said to the entire church, her voice hoarse from laughing. Eleanor was the only one in this whole damn lineage who bothered to look for me. The only one, yet I still had to kill her. Do you know why? Because she was too good? Because if I let her accept me into this family properly, I would have to be grateful. And I swore since the age of 7 that I would never ever be grateful to anyone bearing the name Ashford. Margaret turned to Adrian. Her large brown eyes were not watery now, they were empty. 3 more years, Adrian. 3 more years, and your abandoned cousin would have been the Dowager Duchess. You almost married me, you know, you almost lost. Guards led Margaret outside. She did not resist, still laughing softly to herself all the way through the silent rows of benches. Lyra stood in the middle of the church, blood having soaked all the way down to her heels. Adrian turned back to Lyra. He said nothing. He just unfastened his black velvet cloak, the ceremonial cloak of the Duke of Ravenmore, and draped it over her shoulders. Take her home, he said to Mrs. Halloway, who was standing at the back of the church, crying soundlessly. And call a doctor, a real doctor. That winter passed very slowly. Margaret was tried in the capital and sentenced to lifelong confinement at the Northern Ireland convent. Dr. Whitmore lost his practice license and was imprisoned for 15 years. The fake will that Margaret had prepared for Adrian to sign after the wedding, found in her luggage chest, was destroyed. The Council of Northern Nobility silently withdrew their demand for Adrian to remarry immediately. Because they were shamed by their own choice, at Ravenmore, the wound on Lyra's leg healed slowly. She walked with a limp throughout January and February. Adrian never entered her room, but each morning there were always white chrysanthemums placed on the threshold. the only flower that bloomed in the winter greenhouse. And a warm cup of tea. Lyra did not ask who had placed them. In March, Mrs. Halloway silently moved Lyra's belongings from the attic down to a small room on the second floor, near the library. Lyra did not object. She no longer accepted working as a maid, but she did not become a noble either. She read books in the library. She wrote reply letters to ladies from all over the kingdom, who sent condolences and admiration to the brave maid of Ravenmoor. She replanted the rose garden behind the castle according to the old drawings that Eleanor had left behind. On a late April afternoon, when the first roses were budding on the stone wall, Adrian came to find her in the garden. He did not kneel. He just stood by her for a long time looking at the flowers. "I cannot ask you to be the Duchess," he finally said. "Not now, maybe never. You would have to endure the whispers of the nobility for the rest of your life." "You do not deserve that, yes," Lyra replied. "But I want you to stay at Ravenmoor." "In what role?" "Your Grace," Adrian placed into her hand the handkerchief embroidered with the letter E. The handkerchief she had kept all winter had returned to him through Mrs. Halloway, and now he returned to her once again. "In your role, Lyra, Eleanor's sister, the one who stood up when no one dared to stand. You do not need to be anything else. You do not need a title. Ravenmoor is your home because you brought it back." Lyra looked down at the small silk handkerchief. She thought about a 13-year-old girl with blistered hands in the laundry of the Halverton slum. She thought about a young woman in a blue velvet cloak who paid 10 gold coins to save her. She thought about a promise that was fully kept, finally, after 3 years and 6 weeks. She did not cry. She had cried enough. She just nodded and placed a first rose of the season onto Eleanor's grave in the corner of the garden, beneath the first April sunlight that was warm enough to melt the final layer of frost. High above, from the study window, Duke Adrian Ashford stood looking down, and for the first time in 3 years and 6 weeks, he also let himself smile. There are promises that last longer than a human lifetime. And there is justice that arrives late but is never too late.